I sometimes think that Gordon Brown must be the only man in the country who lies awake at night worrying that he might not be in enough debt. And it seems to me that this debt issue is one of the central issues for the election campaign. And that's unfortunate because I think a large section of the population have no idea what a mess we're in. And the challenge, it seems to me, for political leaders is not about who can announce the biggest increases in unfunded public expenditure, but how we can get the country growing again in order to pay for it. And it's quite depressing that in the debate, those who are quick to denounce as irresponsible the concept of unfunded tax cuts, which would actually increase growth and revenue, are also the keenest advocates of unfunded spending, which is what damages the prospects for growth. And the structural deficit is a phrase which most people have no idea what it means. But what it does mean is unfunded spending, which has got absolutely nothing to do with the impact of recession or of bailing out the banks. It's Gordon Brown's legacy from his famous golden rule, which he used to justify his binge spending at the height of the boom and the party which he had created. And if you ask, this week I've been asking various people, what do you think the structural deficit is? And I get different answers from different people. Some people say, well, the IMF say it's 100 billion. Some people say, well, the government says it's 125 billion, but that includes capital. If you take out the capital and you take the current cyclically adjusted figure, it's 75 billion. It's an absolutely huge sum. And it can only be eliminated by getting Britain growing again. Tax increases, as I thought Liam Byrne acknowledged last week, but he seems to have done a bit of a shuffle this week, will not do it. And if we assumed no reduction in yield, which is to say the least unlikely, in order to raise 125 billion, you would have to increase VAT to 45%, or you'd need a basic rate of income tax of 50%. So simple, you just lower the threshold for the top rate of tax to £5,000 or £6,000 a year. So cutting the twin burdens of tax and government bureaucracy, it seems to me, is the key to getting the economy growing again. And it is absolutely extraordinary. The benefits bill is now a staggering £170 billion a year. And there are now more than 5 million people who are economically inactive. And I say, well, is it any wonder? How many people in this room, if they were paying effective marginal rates of tax of 90 or 95%, might be tempted to become economically inactive as far as the system was concerned? And we need to take these people out of tax altogether by raising thresholds if we're to get Britain working again. And the public sector now, although it's actually only raising a third of its spending, and £1 in every 4 that the government is spending is borrowed, and only a third is coming from taxation, is consuming half our national income. Now the government, with great aplomb, promises that if they're re-elected, by the end of the next parliament, they'll halve the deficit by 2014. But that actually only means halving the amount by which the country's debt is increasing in each of these 4 years. Now, a lot of people out there think it's halving the amount we owe, but it's simply halving the rate at which the debt is growing. So by 2014, our national debt will have almost doubled to £1.473 trillion. Now that's an enormous number. It's so enormous, I can't cope with it. But if it were in £1 coins, and you were to count them at 1 per second, as 1.473 trillion, if we were to convert that, if we could find enough metal in the world, into £1 coins, and we were to count them at 1 per second, how long do you think it would take to finish counting them? The answer is 46,600 years. So the government's proposition, which you're all asked to vote for with great enthusiasm, is that they are going to increase the debt that we owe by the 4 years into the next Parliament by an amount that would take you 23,000 years just to count at 1 per second. And for those who like visual images, if you place the coins that will make up our national deficit, the £1 coins, edge to edge, they'd circle the planet. How many times? Once? Twice? 825 times. Or they'd go to the moon and back 43 times. The interest on that debt alone will be at least £67.3 billion. That is equivalent to half the entire receipts from income tax this year. So if you're struggling to pay your tax bill and you're on a low wage, then you can be grateful to Gordon Brown, because under his plan, £1 in every 2 that you pay in income tax will just go on servicing the debt which has been run up in order to try and win him this election. It's more than enough. That debt alone interest, that debt interest alone is more than enough to abolish council tax. So we have, if you'll pardon the pun, an astronomical problem. Now, there is much talk of cuts, but there are 3 ways of describing cuts that I can think of. One is a cut in nominal or cash terms from, say, 100 to 95, or a cut in real after-inflation terms from 100 to 100, where the second 100 is worth less than the first, or a reduction in planned increase. That is, we thought we were getting 110, but now we're only getting 105. And this is how the politicians debate public expenditure ahead of the election. Public expenditure will increase in the next 5 years on the government's plans from 676 billion to 776 billion, an increase of £100 billion. It's going up by nearly £30 billion in the current year. Now, whilst in real terms the increase will be smaller, it is not a cut. So let's stop talking about cuts and let's start talking about planned increases in expenditure which we cannot find the money to fund. If we want to spend this money, we first need to earn it by stimulating and encouraging the wealth-creating sector. There is no one who has less admiration than I have for the public sector, but the public sector does not create wealth. And by attracting capital to Britain and by rewarding hard work and enterprise, not by penalising it, we can start to create that wealth again. We need to fall in love with the Laffer curve again. We need to cut corporation tax. We need to abolish stamp duty on share transactions. We need to simplify and reform our tax regime to make our country economically competitive again. We need to live within our means as a nation, to stop stealing from our children by piling up debt to fund today's consumption. We need to do everything we can to nurture and support small and medium-sized businesses, which are the key to growth and future prosperity. We are eating the seed corn under Labour. We must tighten our belts, plant for the future, and in the words of that wonderful Peter Sellers film, in the words of Chauncey Gardiner, there will be growth in the spring. Thank you.